just data everywhere, kind of runaway businesses where it's very hard to manage data across many different companies. If you think about how many different companies, how hard it is as an individual organization. So he was sitting there and he said, what if we could use this? Like, I start from the problem. Like, the problem is accessing and managing and controlling data. He's like, what if we could do this, use this to control, access, and leverage all this unstructured data inside organizations the same way that they just asked what planet was Alf born on or something like that, right? So it was just an immediate practical application of something that was a real problem for us at the time that just fascinated me. And then from there, we kind of got sucked into turn-by-turn improvements for AI, efficiency, et cetera.
So do you come from sort of a different world, meaning you're coming from the research side of stuff. How did that start to get introduced into your world?
In pharma, we are following the suit a little bit later because it's tightly regulated business by FDA or European, Japanese, Chinese, Asian FDAs. And so, I mean, it's followed, but we are always watching what's coming next, and everything is super exciting because as I'm knowing the back end, myself and my team also building models and understanding how hard to access the data or work with the data, building algorithms, have a really good predictive model. All these changes and improvements, innovations are very amazing. Like how much work, how many people work on each of this. This is amazingly huge numbers. In my day-to-day job, definitely like pharma, all businesses interested in incorporating AI in their business, either for their sales, commercial, or their R&D. But for our case, we would like to reduce the animal use as much as we can. FDA also supports that, and so I think we would like to use the AI for understanding the data a little bit more so we can use less animals for assessing the drug safety.
So my experience with AI was literally through watching it on TV. Very different than you guys. And the first time I heard about it, I was working at a TV station and a reporter did an entire story about AI and used ChatGPT to write the entire story and get the sound bites for the entire story. And at the end of it, he said the same thing that I stole from him, where he finished it and said, this is what, this AI wrote this entire thing for me. In the world of broadcasting, for me in my past, it was a very useful tool to help me do interview questions on topics that I didn't necessarily know a tremendous amount about. I was talking before to someone about, I was doing stories on ticks, and what do you even ask? What kind of questions do you ask? It's pretty easy to put that in and say, ask this and or what would be the best answer if I'm trying to do something on X, Y, and Z. But what I quickly learned as sort of a layman in this is that it can be very dangerous in the sense that it can spit out things that are frankly completely wrong. One of the things that I did at the beginning of January, and Brian, I think you and I spoke about this beforehand, the other day when we were talking, was I asked ChatGPT how many days away something like March 26th was, and it was January something or other. It was 2 months away, and I don't remember whether it was 60 days or 59 days, and it told me it was 26 days away. And it told me it was 26 days away and was completely wrong. And I don't know if it got caught up on leap years, not leap years, or what it was. But what I quickly realized was I can't trust that this is always going to get this question answered right perfectly for me. And so there are obviously aspects of AI that can be a little dangerous and a little bit scary, especially for all of you who are parts of businesses and in some instances business leaders, where you have to do it in a really careful way. And that's the reason why we're putting this together, to be able to get those questions answered. Speaking of questions, if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand or shout it out and ask, because we want to be able to help answer as much as we possibly can. I should say the three of them. I'm just going to help facilitate that part. So as we kind of start and get going here, and we began talking about it, from your perspectives and any, just carry on the conversation however it flows naturally, what do you guys see as being the largest benefits of having this type of technology that exists? Anybody go?
For me, I think as many different leaders or people in in business, I believe that like 20% of my time produces 80% of the value. So if I can get rid of that 80% of generic stuff that I need to do, I can expand that extra 20% of the time that's generating all that value. So a good example that I love to use is like where people used to look at the map and like plot it out, and you buy the map and you spend all that time figuring out like how to get from point A to point B. Now we're just like, take me there. And it does all that work, and I'm not spending 80% of my time doing that generic stuff. And it's the same thing with whether it's cell phones or the internet or like all these different things that we just accelerated so much stuff. So like I'm using it just to drop a lot of the stuff that I don't need to do. So like for me, that's one of the biggest benefits is that it removes the grunt work out of a lot of different things. I just used it a week ago for comparing 2 contracts against each other. I was like, compare this contract, and this contract against each other, highlight the differences, and tell me anything that's not normal in Connecticut law. And like, that would have taken me 2-3 hours, and I probably wouldn't have done nearly as good of a job because I would have gotten like distracted like halfway through. And so it was perfect for that. Like that's the huge benefit to me, for sure.
Either of you, what do you think? What have you noticed? I guess, what have you noticed in your world that, you obviously said you understand a lot about it. How did you, in your brain, go, oh, wow, this is a game changer. This is something that's really, really big and could really change the way that I do certain things?
In research, the research we are doing, I think going through definitely documents, automation, and standardization, some of the things. These are, I don't want to call it mundane work, but it's just reading but it's...
Call it what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Critical.
Right. A lot of document reading and summarizing, maybe changing and comparing stuff. Once we automate these, I think we can do a lot more with the extra time that we can gain. For my project, mostly I'm doing a lot of programming and coding, and my team as well. That kind of automation using AI, it's actually quite revolutionary in computational sciences space. In that case, we use the data, figure out what the problems are with maybe the drug, the compound, and then we go without testing those in animals. And for lab scientists, they don't have to go through every single data points for hundreds, thousands of compounds. I mean, they can do it. It's a very short time. Again, it's a mundane work for them too, like looking at the same data over and over again, slightly different chemical structures. The AI we are developing is just give them the results. If something looks iffy or something, definitely there is some human in the loop, subject matter experts to go through a couple things that they think that it's flagged or something. But other than that, they can use the rest of their time for innovating new data sets, experiments instead of animals. Same for chemistry labs, coming up with chemical structures. Now we are using AI. So instead of one person doing this, and maybe everything can be done in a few hours, but the scale is huge. Like we can generate 1 million compounds in a second. And that one person not necessarily doing that. All they need to check which one looks more viable based on the human experience. So in that case, definitely as long as we have the human in the loop, I think it's very amazing.
And it has to be in your industry, like similar to ours. Like if I need to know an interface commonly needs to know the syntax of that language to be able to analyze something. So I had a client that uses MATLAB, or I had somebody that doesn't know Python, and you need to communicate it what you want in Python. So like a huge thing is just like I know what I want, but I don't know the syntax to enter it in to this system to be able to use. So a lot of people just don't need to be trained in a lot of these systems because they're just, hey, I need the query to get XYZ information out of the system, and it's things like that that make it really interesting very fast. So.
I think there's some huge disconnects with skill set and outputs that AI is already and has the ability to impact really significantly. I'll give you what I think are a couple examples. First off, just to put some math to Foster's 80-20 rule, that's so true, obviously. Forbes did an extensive study in the last year where they came out with, I think it was 21 or right around 20% of employees' time is spent looking for stuff. I think that's low, but like the fact that they have sort of official documentation at scale from an organization, a reputable organization like that, it's just so much waste. And if you can get that information to people's fingertips a lot faster, that changes the math on an organization potentially. The other thing I think goes hand in hand with the idea of like destruction of jobs or creative destruction. There will be jobs that go away. Like there'll be changes. It'll take some time, but that's fine. But there's also a little bit of a, well, this system or thing is coming to take my job. Like that couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at unemployment, skill sets, and everything else, it's all about optimizing what you have and making the intellectual property, whatever that is, the asset of the organization, as opposed to having to worry about, well, this person's brand new. How do I get her up to speed with the information? So that's a huge benefit. The other thing, as I said, sort of this disconnect, I think Foster's example of the syntax is a good one. We have, like, in our world, there are these functions around like classifying incoming data or assigning an amount of time that's going to be put towards an incoming ticket or effort. And those are really mundane, potentially really important. And you'd like to have a triage person do that because they just touch it and move on. But like if you want to do it right, like you need a lot of information. And if you want to know, I'm putting a ticket in and I want to know if this is going to take 2 hours or 6 hours, I can guess. A triage person can guess, or you can get a really expensive person to do a really boring job of going through the last 100 similar examples to get the real answer. And that person doesn't want to do that. Yeah. So for us to be able to enable them to do what they want to do well and get that garbage out of the way, but the business still needs that information. So if I can get that information where the business needs it and free these people up, you unlock an enormous amount of potential. And I think that's where we slowly need to get people to understand that we are getting the garbage out of your way at this phase. I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. That's not really what we're talking about. But like at this phase, mostly this is around taking these tasks, which not only don't get done consistently, but they don't get done well because you have the wrong resource efforting it. So that's where I see. And there's a whole thing about doing it right. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But that's where I think the real low-hanging fruit is.
We had our first question. Go for it.
Yeah, and I think his last statement might have gotten to where I was going. He was with Seda was speaking, and she was mentioning that they're able to analyze the compound structures, et cetera. But we're talking about drugs, so how do those compounds actually interact with cells, right? And there's a lot of theoretical things that might go into that, but at some point you have to actually see how they work themselves out, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of the study, et cetera. Yeah. So could you address that and maybe go a little deeper, or did Brian's statement about what you're really trying to do is eliminate some initial analysis and then do other things?
Yeah, definitely. We use them as a hypothesis generation tools. In our case, AI use is very risky, but there's always some subject matter experts, some scientists to check and make sure that what we generated makes sense, and also doing a lot of the legwork initially, like Foster mentioned, in different businesses. But yes, at the end, someone needs to go through and validate them to make sure that what we see with the data, with the predictive models AI, in experimental setting, that's what we do. Sometimes we come up with a list of proteins or cells or specific tissues that we can predict those things too. So we can design specific experiments. So we can save us time, save us resources, and we are more targeted hypothesis generation and going after it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I kind of tie those together because a simple example internally is that we needed a highly paid person to go and figure out for project updates. You had to be highly technical to understand what the techs were doing, convert it into layman's terms, and update a client of what just happened. And that's a highly valuable thing to a client. But a lot of highly technical people don't want to do that. And so what we have is AI do that, and a lower end resource will go and be able to generate it and do it all, and then we have an expert check it, and we're like, yes, it makes logical sense, this is true. And so it just speeds those up. What used to take somebody a day and a half, it would be a day and a half every week, is now an hour.
Right.
And so it's a good mirroring of those two.
What I'm hearing the three of you say without saying is this can save money.
Yeah. It should, I mean, unequivocally, it's taking, I don't know what that example is, but that's 10 hours instead of, 1 hour instead of 10 a week. Like, that person is now freed up to do an inordinate amount of other things. Like, that trust but verify thing, I think, is a big piece that's being overlooked, broadly speaking. Again, we come back to that, but the idea of just getting the baseline information done and then training it so that it's specific, like that's what's really cool about where this is heading, the ability to sort of purpose train a lot of these models so that they have explicit expertise, not only around your area of expertise or your technology or your business or whatever it might be, but the way you want to do something. Like, you can train a model to speak in a particular manner. You can train a model to tell a tech, to extract "I Googled it" from a note that you send into a client-facing summary, right? Like, that's not something that clients love to hear. I Googled it and found this out, right? So you can train the model, just extract that. I researched it. Like, there's simple things, and that could be very unique to a particular business. There's all sorts of ways that you can manipulate these and, with the right frameworks, control really purpose-built outputs. That's what's cool. So it's like, it's tailor-made, it's personal, and it's saving you money.
So one of the little
It
words
also
that
requires work. I would just note that.
yeah, of course, and we can jump into that
It's
in a
not
sec
alchemy.
too. It's not what?
It's not alchemy.
Yeah,
It's like,
right.
you can't sit back and watch it spin straw into gold. Like, there is some work to be done.
January to March is not 20. It's not 20 days.
That is alchemy.
I wrote down the term competitive advantage. Can you talk? All three of you, I'm sure, can talk about that. I know, obviously, in your world, that's part of it, right? You want to get a leg up on the competition. We've talked a little bit about the cost-saving aspect of it. You find that can help, have a competitive advantage when you have that time saving?
Oh, absolutely. Currently, we have the drug discovery and development pipeline takes about 10 to 15 years, starting from a disease and identifying a target and finding the drug, the compound, early clinical studies, and after approval, it takes 10 to 15 years, about $2 billion just for one compound, one drug. So especially the early research takes about the half of the time. So if we can reduce it in a year or something, we save like 75% of our time for more clinical trials, or like put that time into other compounds, other diseases, the treatment. So the whole idea is bring the treatments to the patients faster. It's definitely a leverage.
Foster, do you feel like it gives the company somewhat of a competitive advantage, being able to focus on the things that should be focused on instead of the other stuff?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Because, again, the 80-20 rule, right? You're removing the grunt work or the leg work out of a lot of that kind of time. But I think it's actually unfairly giving competitive advantage to larger organizations. So a good example is that in smaller organizations, you might have one person that does 3 jobs. And so to save them let's say I'm just quoting all day. If I have that person quoting and procuring and ordering and doing the bookkeeping, where commonly those things are like tied together in smaller organizations, to save 10 minutes of just one thing doesn't really help that. But if I have a team of 5 people just doing quoting, and I can significantly save them time, it gives a huge advantage to the larger organization to be able to do that at scale because of how that works. So I do find it to give competitive advantages, but knowing how you can use that in your own industry and apply it to certain jobs and certain specific functions is really is the magic to it. A lot of people see as AI as like, how am I going to use this competitive advantage? What was really important is to take your vision of your company and like the core processes or the core goals or objectives you're trying to do and figure out how that lays into it. A lot of people I see adopting technology because they believe they should adopt the technology. It doesn't really, like I have a lot of clients that do that. They're like, we should use this. I'm like, for what? And like, it really needs to align to your company or to your goals or your own objectives and figuring out how that interweaves to it, because I see a lot of people adopt it and like, great, now what? And they invest a lot of time and cycles into it.
Yeah, on that point, what sort of perspectives can you bring around enabling skills or enabling efforts kind of in parallel to the AI work? Things like organizational change management, making sure the company, the teams are able to kind of work with the technology in different ways than they may have worked in the past. Can you talk a little bit about those other sort of components that need to kind of ride along with AI implementations?
I'll jump. I think it sort of depends upon what the outcome is that you're looking for from AI. And so if you have, let me try to answer this by jumping onto something that Foster just said. It's definitely easier to gain anything at scale. The flip side is that it's harder to run a business when you have people doing 3 or 4 different things. So it's easier to gain efficiency from more consistent or pervasive inefficiency in a smaller business. Some of those, some organizations have maturity that others don't, but in general, if they're doing those 3 tasks, they're probably ripped from here to here to here. There's probably turnover, and so they'd really benefit from one way to access that information. It's all about the data, is my next comment. Like, whatever data you have is what makes you you. All AI is going to do, depending upon what you're doing, is allow you to access it more efficiently, find it faster, build workflows, enable workflows, and then I sort of say it depends in terms of enablement. There are like actual skills that you can build with AI or robotic process automation or things along those lines, and those are not necessarily the same thing, that require a fair bit of work. Other pieces is just a matter of getting information into systems faster to allow them to be more effective. I've seen consistently that pieces of software, you just said this, people buy a lot of stuff, right? They're leveraging somewhere, I make it up, 10 to 30% of the functionality that those systems can have. If you can automate getting the data into fields in those systems, you can unlock another 100% or 2x the value of the thing you already bought. So I don't know if that really answers like the workflow and everything, but a lot of it comes down to like, what are you trying to gain? What is one trying to gain out of this implementation? And if you can go from there, then getting data into systems. There's automation and then there's use of it, right? So automation is great because no one has to touch it. You don't have to worry about it to change people's behavior. Use of it is something. You do have to train people to work a little differently. Like I drove the wrong place this morning because I drive there every morning and I was like, oh shit, I'm not going there today. Like the brain does its thing, right? So training people to be like behave a little differently does require some workflow, some behavioral changes. But I don't know if that helps. Like in general, there's automations that you can build, there's skills that you can build, and then there's enablement for people. And I think it's a really broad topic to try to tackle in one shot.
And I'll hop to you right after. The really important is that small businesses, let's take small organizations, 20 people and below, are actually extremely efficient, but they're not mature. Mm-hmm. Those are 2 very different things. And so when an organization, it becomes more mature, usually it becomes less efficient. And that's why it's competitive advantage to a larger organization, yes, because I'm removing that inefficiency that natively comes from siloing somebody's role. Yep. So the change management and adapting it into an organization, it forces the organization to become more mature. I need to have a very standardized process, a structured way of doing something like that is highly repeatable. And once I have that maturity, great. Now I can become more efficient, and you can just remove the efficiency. So explaining that to organizations of like, hey, this isn't to remove your job, this is to remove the highly standardized processes. But a small organization, when you got one person doing 3 jobs, there's not like they don't have like documented SOPs on like how they do that. They're just doing it. hence why they're so efficient at it. But people don't usually love doing that. Like, they don't like doing the highly repetitive stuff, but they're able to do it. So handling the change management in the organization is really just about communicating, like, what is this good at, what is it bad at, and what is this going to enable you to do? And then explaining that difference between maturity and efficiency, because those two things get crossed all the time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in similar fashion, it's just the awareness. Change management is hard across the board. So just starting the conversation at your small organization and going to free events like this or taking free tutorials, like that really helps open everybody up. I mean, I feel like we've been on a journey for about a year, and I'm like a late adopter because I'm like, oh, one more new tool. And I have to, download this app on my phone too. But the exciting part is fast forwarding to the value, and it doesn't take away anything that I've learned over the course of my career. I mean, your example of GPS and the mapping, which is fantastic, but actually having a sense of direction is also really important, because you miss a turn here.
Talk to my daughter about that. I have no idea where she's going.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you miss a turn, then where's GPS going to do for you? So, that's, I like the idea of being able to edit the responses afterwards, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the human element that's involved in this always sort of needs to be involved in this to an extent, as I made that comment before in the joke about the dates. I'm sure that some of you that are here in this room are familiar with the word compliance, most likely. I only heard about it when I started here, but it's really, really important to be very careful with things like ChatGPT when you're putting certain information in there, right? I want to talk a little bit about some of those risks, because the lowest hanging fruit of a risk obviously is you put something in, it spits out an answer, and it's just wrong, or it does something that's completely incorrect, and you go, okay, well, duh. But you do have to be careful about the proprietary or secret things that you end up entering into something. You're not going into ChatGPT to do the things that you're doing. Correct?
No.
No.
Definitely. We are not allowed.
Right.
We are hand-slapped. So what Pfizer does, and I'm sure other pharma companies do that too, is that they take the ChatGPT and internalize it, meaning put all kinds of firewalls and everything. Then we can use the ChatGPT in our internal system. It's definitely not exactly the same ChatGPT in the public version, but we have our own version so we can search or do like automation or asking some questions, gathering some information, with ChatGPT. But there are definitely tight regulations around it. We can't really put a target like a protein that we are studying its first time. If we put it in public space, I mean, I didn't know that, but ChatGPT or other people can actually check who's searching what, and based on IP addresses or other things, they can understand and realize, okay, Pfizer people actually searching for this kind of target or this kind of diseases, so they can have competitive advantage over us, which we don't know. So that kind of pitfalls, like to prevent it, definitely we internalize our own ChatGPTs and everything. Is it fast? Is it happening overnight? No, it takes months and months to put it there, because there are a lot of regulations and legal and compliance needs to search and approve. And we make sure that it's ethical. We have ethical AI teams. But yes, overall, to make sure that everything is like staying in our own space, and it takes time. So we can super efficiently and fast and do what we try to do. We still a little bit, but I think when we think about the risk-benefit ratio, I think that's the best.
It was Samsung right off the bat had like a big leak about
Day 30, right?
Yeah, like day 30 into it, they somebody uploaded something that was completely private and secret to them, and then it was publicly available because they didn't know that it would become public knowledge. Yeah. So that was a pretty famous one. And that's why Copilot was so popular, is because natively it came out with Microsoft that it would self-isolate. Like you can set settings and it would just be your own information. But the number one complaint that we get about it is like, well, ChatGPT is way better. It's like, well, yeah, this is designed to be your own world, and it can pull content from your own world, which makes it better for hyper-specific cases, but everybody compares it to like a ChatGPT, and they're like, why can't I do this, this, and this, or it doesn't have the latest, most information, and the biggest risk is just stopping people from entering it into their own private accounts. It's like somebody having their own Dropbox on your work computer, and they're using their personal Dropbox to like store everything, and you're like, that's no good. It's the same exact thing. It's just a different use case.
So I think it's fascinating the way we got here. Almost every other major piece of technology over the last, I don't know, as long as I've been around, but even before, sort of came from a commercial initial use. Like the internet came from the Army, right? Like everything came, and by the time it got down to Cisco creating products, like it was being presented to the marketplace in a firm, buttoned up output, hardware, software, whatever. This was personal use day one, quite literally. And I can't think of another scenario where something this seismic landed in everybody's lap in the same 2-week period in November of 2022. Now, Foster, a self-admitted nerd, had been playing with it, like other versions of it, as had my partner. Like people had been doing generative AI stuff for a while, and people have been doing semantic AI search and things for decades. But the idea of just consumer grade, day one, everywhere, has created a real problem for businesses because of that. Because people are like, well, it's not as good as ChatGPT. The fact that it's making 25% of the stuff up is irrelevant to a person who is sitting there generally asking it to write haiku or like something funny about a friend, and it's amazing. And then it does also provide really good information as well, but it's got two major problems. It has 1.7 trillion parameters in it. Like, that's a lot. That's like a kid with a lot of information and nowhere to dump it. So when you ask it questions, it does not think that it doesn't have the answer. Yeah. When you build purpose-built models, and there's a million ways to do it, you create a different experience. More importantly, it's kind of put Foster's example, it puts you on the back foot when you're explaining, well, it's not as good as it's not as fast as ChatGPT. It doesn't make stuff up every single time, but like there was another, I don't call it a study, but like 4 or 5 experts came out and they said, right now they're using ChatGPT, Gemini, and something else, and they cross-reference them, and they find there's about 25% failure rate, which is, that's a lot, right? 1 out of 4 times it's making something up. So there's 2 quick comments on this from my perspective. Go ahead.
It's not even making something up, it thinks it's right. And so I always relate this back to Jeopardy because it was its instance, and like people answer Jeopardy all the time and they think they're right. So like they connected some dots that shouldn't connect. So it's working very similarly to it. So I always like to relate these things. They're like, it's like a really smart friend. 80% of the time they're right, but like even Jeopardy people, they're hit that buzzer thinking they know the answer. It's a great distinction. You're totally right. Like that's what happens when you have almost a 2 trillion. A parameter is an example, right? Like so 2 trillion examples in there. Like it gets to the point where it thinks it's right. Yeah. So it's giving. Now it happens to be wrong 25% of the time. So it depends what you're trying to do. It might not matter, but it's doing it quick and it's doing it pretty. So people get this in their hands immediately, and they're like, "Wow, this is amazing." We have a world that does not vet anything, so the fact that it's not relevant, not accurate, is not relevant, right? So as a business owner or as an organization, you're trying to sort of set this new paradigm. We don't set stuff up. It's still going to be wrong occasionally, by the way. It's always going to hallucinate. It's a matter of whether you can do it 2% and that sort of thing, and have a hyperlink back. There's all sorts of ways to address it and put it within a framework of acceptability. But this is not. And the 2 things that happen, one is, just to close Foster's example of Samsung, there's a context window. That's what this thing is when you put it into ChatGPT or anything for that matter. The context window with ChatGPT is the input. So I could put the code of my software platform in there and say, tell me if you're missing anything. That is out the door, right? So that's an extreme example. You just let the keys to the kingdom go. Awful, unacceptable, obvious, right? The other thing is what's coming in. And a great example I heard a couple months ago was like, if you sort of had your data and it was a drink, whatever, and then you had this black box, it's another drink, you don't know what's in it, it's in a black coffee mug or something like that, you pour it in, you have no idea what it is. Like, would you drink it?
because that's what you just did with the data when you mix unknown inputs. Now, you can look at it and say, well, I'm summarizing things and it's okay, so this model's okay for the following reasons because I'm vetting it and I know exactly what I'm doing. I am an expert in this, or I have decided what I want my output to look like, so that cuts a corner for me, that's good. But if you're really just outsourcing that effort to an unknown set of parameters to feed that information back, it has changed materially your data. So it's not just what you're sending out and what happened to your proprietary data, it's what you're making on the input that is important. And it's really important to be able to have transparency. And there are a bunch of these. There's a bunch of open-faced large language, like you should be working with something that has complete transparency on what's in there, so that when you want to change something, you actually have the ability to make a change that would improve or adjust the outputs.
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, that was a mouthful.
Yeah.
I mean, besides the context window, the code, the parameters, the input that you're putting in, are there any other controls and that helps with the limitations that AI kind of currently still has, or in the future, that will give that competitive advantage even more so with efficiencies? I know Seda talked about the firewalls within Pfizer, so it kind of reaches all realms of industry.
So I have a quick line, and then Foster and Seda can jump in. There's business grade AI and there's consumer grade AI. And I think understanding the difference is the most important thing. And I think that much of the world doesn't realize that. And if you look at fintech, if you look at healthcare, if you look at drug discovery, like they have not shoved these models into their product in the first 12 months or 18 months of the generative AI being on the proverbial market, because it's not controlled and they don't know what the inputs are. So they haven't done it. When they start to slowly do it, they are doing it with business grade AI, which means I know exactly what's going in. I can reverse engineer the models. There's a whole, we can talk more about, there's a whole community of open-faced large language models, which means you know what's going in, and then there are ways you train that data. And that's really where the rubber meets the road for business grade AI. What do I want this to do? I want it to summarize something. I want it to automate a particular function. Like, I need to train it. I need to create that skill. Otherwise, here's a simple and silly analogy. Like, you can have a nurse that went to state school that knows exactly what you need at this point in time and can deliver that based on his or her training. Or you can have a kid who went to Harvard who has no applicational skill whatsoever, but an enormous amount of information that's going to tell you what maybe you should do at that moment. Like, one is specifically trained. That's a terrible analogy, but you can hopefully buy it. One is specifically trained for a purpose, and that's where the businesses need to make that effort in understanding what's under the hood, and then how am I personalizing it to make it useful, as opposed to just forever, if people are putting information into ChatGPT, the uncontrolled version, you will get untrusted, not always terrible, but untrusted and inconsistent examples like 26 days away.
Yeah, a quick, hopefully build on your analogy, general practitioner, healthcare provider, right? And then when something's funky or I need something specific, I'm going to a specialist that just knows this. And you're going to get far more accurate. ChatGPT is the most popular known model, but like that is the general practitioner. Like, they're not specialized in really anything. They're using general information. The more information you give it and the more context you give it, the more accurate it will be. But like, if you want a competitive advantage, a lot of times people are just building a model to solve a specific task. So law is basically, and one of our last things is like they're built on plagiarism, right? Like,
yeah, that was
fun. It's literally there's copies and there's law and you're building off case law, and so like a very specialized. The more controls and specificity that you give to a model or to an application, the better it will be at the task at hand. So most of our job is to separate like a general, help me do general random things, and a lot of times it's to help them solve a very specific problem.
So I'm curious, the limitations that I was asking about mostly between the individual and the business AI?
Doesn't matter what it is. So even if you go to ChatGPT and look in their plugin store, you can add, there's things that give a lot of like that limits controls or is designed to solve a certain problem. So you can be like, one's I use all the time, bedtime stories for my daughter. I'm like, it's designed to do that, so it doesn't say inappropriate things in a bedtime story for a 4-year-old. So like the more context again you give it will be, it becomes far more accurate. So it doesn't matter whether it's business or general or public, like it's just about the specificity of it. So you can go to ChatGPT, look at the plugin market, and you'll see like 1,000 plugins that make it specific to solve a certain problem.
The one issue with ChatGPT is it is not transparent. That does not matter for many examples, which is why it has whatever hundreds of millions of users. And it does matter. Like you can't get into the black box, as they call it. Like they do not expose what's in the model. Others do. So like one of the things to look at from a business perspective is, do I know what is in my model? Can I unwind what's in there? And do I care? And I know that's just one example. Like you care that there's no foul words in the bedtime story, but you really don't care where the context of it came from. You know, like it doesn't really matter. And if you do care because you're doing any sort of other business level work, honestly, ChatGPT or OpenAI is probably not the model for that. There are 100 other ones. It has nothing to do with this versus that. It's really about the transparency on that
Take
side.
the law firm example, right? I want a contract. I don't want it using general information it found online. I want it to only using case law and known contracts that held up in legal court, right? Like I want it to know only that information. You don't know where it's pulling it. It could pull, somebody could write a blog article that's completely incorrect. It might ingest that information, and that's where you get these hallucinations and things.
Foster, you mentioned using AI to review case law, and Brian, you were mentioning having your data potentially being tainted by AI. I recently read a study that the use of the word meticulous in research papers has increased by an order of magnitude over the past 18 months. And the leading hypothesis is that people are using generative AI to put together research papers, and for whatever reason, the use of that particular word in whatever model everyone seems to be using is increased in weight. And as more research papers come out with the word meticulous, and AI models are trained on research papers or things like case law, that's what's caused that open feedback loop. Are we concerned at all about the impact of these feedback loops, or just the sanitization of all of our data?
So
Yes.
what you're looking for is like, they call it poisoning. So like you can poison the model. And so there's some just trolls out there that just like to throw things into the model that are incorrect, and you can actually tweak an entire model. And that's what OpenAI or whoever's running that model's job is to try to remove some of those variations. But yeah, like literally there's entire applications and like groups out there that are just designed they think AI is gonna like destroy all of humanity, so they're poisoning it intentionally, right? Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff like that. But yes, what you're talking about is poisoning the model, whether it's intentional or not intentional, but like that is a classic feedback.
So it's getting to the point where I think the latest stat was 25% of the internet is now synthetic, which is AI generated content. And so when it's kind of amazing. The internet's eating itself, right? So when you get to the point where like you don't know whether it was created by a model or a human, that's how you end up with meticulous firing all over the place. That's a benign example. There are scenarios where that's not so great, but that's why the inputs matter so much, is being able to control and understand what is feeding your model. Your data is what matters from a business perspective. Having that in an isolated scenario is point one, so it doesn't end up in the context window and out into the world. There's a lot of ways to do that. And then what am I training it against? How do I make sure that I can't stop the word meticulous per se, but those sort of scenarios that continue to replicate. And you see it with back to the media landscape. There was an example last year where some football team beat another football team in high school football, and it said in a close encounter of the athletic kind was like the headline. And my partner did a search on it. It came up like 37 times across the country on that Saturday morning. where it's now they said Lead AI is a software company that writes these, so they acknowledged that it was an AI platform writing the lead, but that same silly kind of ridiculous headline that you would never use came up like multiple times from Texas to Ohio. It's like, so that is a problem. Like, what is the input is kind of the takeaway.
Yeah, but then if, like, as you mentioned, 25% of the input that's training new models was generated by older versions of the model, like how do we prevent that snowball effect?
This is kind of what we were talking about earlier with some of the stuff you do. Like if you're building it and have certain information and you're just assuming that that data set is accurate, you're going to extrapolate a lot of information. So we're talking about controls with animals and things. Like, but you have to trust your core data set, which is why it's so important to know what's in it. So, yeah.
So you'll see, I'm hijacking this, I'll stop in a second, but you'll see a lot of the model, like I keep coming back to this 2 trillion or 1.7 trillion, that's almost too much unless you're doing really fun stuff, which is why the consumer starting point is so interesting. There are very effective business models with 3 billion parameters in them. Now that's still a ton, but when you think about it in relative terms to 1 to 2 trillion, it's inconsequential. You can control what's in a 3 billion parameter model a lot better. And when you're deriving answers from your data and training it to say, I don't know, then you're getting a better experience. And when you know what's in those 3 billion, because someone either on your team or a partner or something can, like it's white labeled, you see everything right there, then you can make sure that you have less junk in it. If you have 2 trillion, there's a lot of synthetic data in there. And this is what they did. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. They just ingested everything. Like they ingested the entire internet. YouTube's all in there, and it's against the YouTube terms. But Google didn't say anything when OpenAI did it because they were about to do it themselves. And so both of them are breaking their own terms of all YouTube information. It's all out there. So that's like where you get to this scale where how do you control it for your business purposes? I think it's wonderful for things that I can vet, OpenAI, ChatGPT, right? But if I'm not sure, I don't want to go down that road.
The next point that I wrote on here, I think it segues into this perfectly, which is when it goes past just a person searching for something, and I was chuckling inside because the first thing that I did when I saw ChatGPT was I wrote haikus and rap songs making fun of my friends and then sent it to them, and they said, oh my God, why'd you spend so much time doing that? But it was frankly dumb, and it was just as a joke. It didn't really make a difference. At what point do you go from that, personal model? Obviously, I used the word compliance in a sentence just a little while ago. Obviously, you have to be very careful with what you use. How does an MSP kind of get brought into that conversation where, from making sure that you are staying within the compliance that you have, to switching from using the free stuff to the stuff that's not free, right? I think we've talked a little bit about things like Microsoft Copilot. Where do you transition to that phase where it's like, all right, I'm going to have to spend a little bit of money to do this, but it's going to be done the right way, the safe way, et cetera, et cetera?
It's the same way like when Pfizer decided what they're going to use for it. It's when it becomes specific and not general. So a lot of times Copilot is, people get frustrated with it because the model is like frozen. They know what's in it. And then all they're doing is they're generating and making it hyper specific to tasks. So like, great, I can ingest this document, look for X, Y, and Z in this document. So let's say it's a insurance company and they have insurance policies, and like every broker goes like, send me everything you have, and like they just want somebody to read it, and you can train it and be like, I'm looking for these 30 things out of these policies, and that system will grab it, work on it, and then spit it out in a very specific way. So but to do that, again, what you're doing is you're just taking a model and slicing it up and saying, I want this very specific task. So when I want that with high level of accuracy is when people start investing into it. So a large portion of what we do is like, great, do you just need people to be slightly more efficient and remove the BS from their day, or do you need a very specific task to be done, or am I eliminating a very painful thing? Like, great, let's ingest 15 insurance policies, read 200 pages of information to get the same 15 or 20 things out of it over and over again. Like, nobody likes that job. So a lot of times that's where we're coming in to figure out okay, what should we use? Or if there's a compliance or regulatory or security issue to it. And then what a lot of people don't realize is that how much of the information in their organization is actually available. So the biggest risk that we have is that most people have all this content in their on their servers and files and all of that, and a lot of people have access to it, but they don't know how to access to it or how to get to it. Well, AI just makes it really easy to go and grab that. I can ask a question and it's like, oh yeah, well here, pulls up a payroll document for everybody in the company. They didn't know they had access or how to access that information, but they have the ability to. So a lot of times we're just determining those risks, trying to limit those things, and figuring out what they can or can't use. So a lot of times I have people, again, taking the insurance or let's say medical billing, like I just want to ingest this, figure out what should be done here and what are the most probable issues, but I'm taking people's sensitive information. I can't put that into a public model, and I need to control that information to make sure it stays in my context. So a large portion of what we're doing is just guiding them to like, here's the right bucket, here's the right horse to bet on in this race.
After we finish this conversation, obviously anyone who has questions can go. I want to be mindful of the time. I'm going to ask each one of the three of you one last question. Instead, I'll start with you. What do you see the future of AI looking like in 10 years' time?
It's a very good question.
I know, that's why I asked it.
I hope I don't get that one.
You're getting the same one. You have more time to think about it. No, what do you think? You know, is it better answers to questions? Is it more automation? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, because of the nature of science and research, there will be better versions of it. No doubt on that. It's going to be, again, there may be some snowballing effects. Some could be benign or some could be a little dangerous. But because there are data scientists or researchers, they'll be aware of that. They'll be doing all the assessments, coming up with new methodologies to make sure that data is not biased or what the pitfalls are. There are already a lot of research going on in every aspect of AI. And I'm more optimistic side in AI. So definitely aware of the risks and pitfalls, but still I believe it's revolutionary. And with robots and everything, I think I'm also very interested in robots and engineering conferences and stuff. They also use it for a lot of different materials, all kinds of different synthetic materials and stuff. So now robots are not just very rough, and everything is so soft and like soft robotics and everything. I mean, it's amazing. Like, it's not just one area. It's not just consumer level or business level or in every levels right now. It's a little scary because everything moves so fast. Even for us, it's so hard to keep up with the knowledge, the published papers and everything. So we need to use kind of ChatGPT to summarize the latest achievements or publications and everything. So actually the advancements are way faster than our own capabilities to understand and adapt. So that part I think need a little bit of more attention, but I think overall it's going to be great.
Brian, where was the last place you went on vacation? I'm just kidding. No, what do you think? Yeah, this is an estimate.
I was curious about. I was jealous about that question. That's all right.
10 years is a tough number. I think that's kind of in between periods of. But anyhow, I think for the next 5 years, it's just going to drive wild efficiencies, like significant, I should say, efficiencies. I do think. I guess the inflection will be interesting. Does it continue to run as a consumer-led technology where that kind of wags the dog and businesses fall behind, or does it sort of bifurcate, as I think it will, and you get a lot of business-grade AI that rolls into the marketplace over the course of the next kind of 12 to 1 to 5 years? I think that will be a big part of it. I think that one of the things that will limit it is energy consumption. It's every time you want to ask, I keep coming back to this number, like 1.7 trillion is a lot of data to chew through to get an answer. So there's not enough out there right now in terms of raw materials and such to sort of power the direction of where we're headed. So things will significantly have to change on that side. I don't think we're going to be at artificial general intelligence at that time. If that idea of having like free will or whatever you want to call it, I think it's very much going to be task based. But I think we will automate an inordinate amount of tasks that right now we're just trying to figure out how they can be driven out of the business. I think it will have that creative destruction effect in 10 years where there'll be a lot of roles that will be changed, but mostly in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Foster. What do you think?
I think it will fundamentally change how people are educated and how people respond to information. So using the maps and like being good with direction, there's not a lot of people that have natural direction anymore. But is that a requirement for success? And I think it was going to change like how you interact with that information and using it. Like we're used to like doing things manually, and that's my go-to. A lot of people are going to be used to like just being able to get generally the right information, and training people to be more skeptical of the information, because right now it's just assumed to be trustworthy.
Yes.
So I think the education overall and how people fundamentally consume information is going to be dramatically different. And I think it's just a great accelerator. If you want something done, ask a busy person. Now take every busy person and remove that 80% of junk that they're doing. How much more stuff are they going to do? How many more applications can somebody write when 50% of the base code is done for you, right? Like, or if I need to debug something and I can have something help me point me in the general direction of what is wrong or the probability of the top 3 things that are wrong, I can just get that test done so much faster. So the rate of innovation of applications being done, proteins being found, doesn't matter what it is, like it's going to so insanely accelerate all of that. I'm excited for that component to it. I can't imagine it becoming intelligent or singularity or whatever.
I agree. Yeah,
It's just so limited. People are just creeped out because it seems human in its response.
Right.
It's actually not super smart.
Which is amazing, right? Like that's the thing that tricks people,
Yeah.
essentially, is that the answer is so elegant.
Yeah.
And it's like, dig a little deeper, but I agree. I don't think that we're going there either.
At the end of the day, I guess what I'm hearing is in 10 years, it still will not be able to tell me the difference between how many days it is from January to March.